Hi, my name is Parashar, and this is my argument presentation. Critical thinking is a term that's loosely defined by the general population and people who haven't taken any philosophy courses. Luckily, we have, and the skills we learned in class can be applied to virtually any situation, including current events. By applying these skills, we can deconstruct the claims and arguments that people make and reveal the underlying strengths or issues within the argument. Arguments generally have a structure or pattern to them, which have been studied by logicians and philosophers. These patterns are called schemes of argumentation, and the scheme I'll be presenting to you is called the causal argument. Causal arguments are a type of empirical scheme of argument that's used when the arguers debate on factual issues. Factual issues are issues that are related to claims that are made by the arguer, which are controversial when they're closely examined. Causal arguments attempt to establish the cause of a specific state of affair or situation, or put simply, Y is caused by X. X is the claim that the arguer is making, and Y is the outcome that arises that's connected to the claim. For this type of argument to be a valid one, it must follow this structure. Premise 1, X causes Y. Premise 2, this is the best explanation for Y in question. And conclusion, this X really did cause or does cause Y. Even though the argument is valid if it follows that general structure, that alone doesn't prove that it's a good one. In order for the causal argument to be strong, the arguer carries the burden of proof to provide evidence that A, X causes Y, and B, this really is the best explanation for Y. If one or both of these can be contested upon further investigation, the chances of the argument being weak are high. A causal argument can be considered weak if one or more of these conditions apply. A. The claimed correlation between X and Y doesn't exist. B. The correlation between X and Y are due by chance. C. There is a second cause accounting for the correlation between X and Y. And D. It is more likely that the causal argument is the other way around, that Y causes X. If the scheme of causal argument is weak, it's considered to carry the fallacy of questionable cause. Let's look at a real-life example of a causal argument that's based on recent events and deconstruct it to see if it's valid and whether it's considered strong or weak. This is an excerpt from the White House speech, which I edited by removing filler words or sentences in between, which didn't relate to the argument at hand. In March 2020, right when coronavirus cases in the US were rising, Trump announced that a combination of drugs, hydroxychloroquine and Z-Pak or azithromycin antibiotics, taken together, gave promising results in the treatment of the virus. He made a causal argument which stated that coronavirus in countries with malaria took this drug, hydroxychloroquine, and because of this, there is very little semblance or presence of the virus in these countries. I suggest pausing here to read the whole excerpt to understand the breakdown on the next slide. Breaking this argument down further into its constituent parts can reveal the underlying issues with Trump's claim. If X causes Y, then X is taking the anti-malarial drug hydroxychloroquine, and Y is very few cases of coronavirus in countries ridden with malaria. The premises from his argument on the last slide are as follows. Premise 1 is that a man on the verge of death was given hydroxychloroquine and saw improvement over the next few hours. Premise 2 is that the hydroxychloroquine used for malaria has been proven to be very effective. The conclusion is that the combination of hydroxychloroquine and the Z-Pak is looking very good for treatment of coronavirus, and the main conclusion is that countries with high cases of malaria using hydroxychloroquine have seen very little cases of coronavirus because of this. The arguer is Trump and his White House administration, and the audience here are the people in the US. So right off the bat, we can agree that this argument is valid because it follows the general structure of a causal argument and the premises lead to a logical conclusion. Each premise is relevant to the subject at hand and acceptable by authority because there's no reason to doubt Trump's information, which comes from his administration, doctors, and scientists. The premises, however, are not sufficient because premise 2 could be controversial. Premise 2 has to be supported with further evidence coming from scientific studies of the drug that are done, and the burden of proof lies with the arguer, Trump. This is one reason that this argument can be considered weak. If we look at the conditions for what makes a causal argument weak from the previous slide, we can apply what we learned and what Trump said to further test the strength of the argument. Starting with A, the claim correlation doesn't exist. This condition is not fulfilled as the claim correlation does in fact exist. The World Health Organization was quoted to state that the virus was slow to reach Africa, which is a country with high annual malaria cases. This argument becomes more weak when we explore condition B, that the correlation is due by chance. Rick Price, a professor of global health at Menzies School of Health Research in Australia, stated that fewer than 0.5% of the population of Africa would have taken the drug at the right time and dosage for it to be effective against coronavirus, and that only a small fraction of the population of countries with high malaria cases use hydroxychloroquine for the treatment of malaria. In addition, Peter Hotez, a professor and dean of National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine, stated that there isn't much coronavirus testing being conducted in countries with high cases of malaria such as Africa. This information comes from credible sources and further supports that Trump's argument is a weak one. In order to remedy this, Trump must provide his own research and figures and statistics to back up his claim. Finally, we look at the last two conditions of a weak causal argument. C, there is a second cause accounting for the correlation between alleged cause and effect is a hard one for the arguer to prove. There's so many confounding factors that could be the reason why countries with high cases of malaria using hydroxychloroquine have low numbers of coronavirus. This could include things such as the fact that the continent of Africa, it's much larger than the US, and it's much harder for the virus to spread over long distances. Or maybe there's fewer air travel and visitors to countries with high malarial cases. Lastly, D, the causal relationship is the other way around, seems unlikely since hydroxychloroquine is proven to be an efficient anti-malarial drug. Because of this overwhelming evidence towards Trump's causal argument being weak, we can confidently say that he has committed the fallacy of questionable cause. Here are some discussion questions which you can try answer on your own in the student forums. I'll see you guys there. Thanks for listening to my presentation.